At exactly 0917 a.m., on a freezing morning along the Yukon-Alaska border, the tranquility of the stratosphere was shattered. A U.S. Air Force F-22 Raptor, the deadliest air superiority fighter in existence, dropped from 40,000 feet like a stone. No radio call, no flight plan deviation warning, just 38,000 pounds of stealth alloys screaming downward at Mach 1.2 toward a Canadian CP-140 Aurora. The American pilot leveled off with less than 500 feet of vertical separation, the sonic boom rattling the patrol plane's airframe like an earthquake. He believed this was a harmless flex, a chance to buzz the neighbors and remind them who owns the sky. He thought he was the hunter, surprising a slow, prop-driven relic. But he was wrong. He wasn't diving into a blind spot, he was accelerating directly into a digital kill box that would strip his classified stealth secrets bare in seconds. The F-22 Raptor doesn't just fly, it dominates physics. At over $150 million per airframe, it is the crown jewel of American air power, a fifth-generation ghost capable of engaging targets before they even know they're being hunted. Its twin, Pratt & Whitney F-119 engines generate 70,000 pounds of combined thrust, allowing it to supercruise faster than sound without lighting its afterburners. To the young lieutenant in the cockpit, the Canadian aircraft ahead was nothing more than a flying barn door. The CP-140 Aurora, based on the Lockheed Electra airframe from the 1950s, looked like a relic of a bygone era. It plodded along at 300 knots, its 4 turboprop engines churning the cold air with the grace of a dump truck compared to the Ferrari-like precision of the Raptor. The American pilot saw this as a strict predator-prey dynamic. He assumed the Canadians were flying blind, relying on outdated radars that couldn't even scratch the paint of his advanced stealth coating. He viewed his aggressive approach as a lesson in modern warfare, a sharp reminder of the technological chasm between the two allies. But arrogance is a dangerous co-pilot. He was so focused on the visual dominance of his aircraft that he forgot the first rule of intelligence gathering: never underestimate the quiet ones. The American pilot looked at the CP-140 and saw a vintage transport plane. What he failed to realize was that the Canadians had gutted the interior of that vintage airframe and stuffed it with the most advanced surveillance architecture in NATO's inventory. This was the Block 4 modernization suite, effectively turning the Aurora into a flying supercomputer. You see, those odd blisters and bulbous antennas protruding from the Aurora's belly aren't aerodynamic flaws. They are high-fidelity vacuum cleaners for data. The centerpiece is the AN/ALQ-217 electronic support measures system. Unlike a standard radar that shouts out a signal and waits for an echo, the ALQ-217 listens. It is a passive digital predator that inhales electromagnetic waves, categorizing every pulse and frequency within a 300-mile radius. Paired with this is the Wescam MX-20 electro-optical turret, a camera system so sensitive it can distinguish a coffee cup from a soda can at 40,000 feet. While the F-22 is designed to be invisible to radar, it cannot hide the heat of its engines or the electronic noise of its avionics from sensors this sensitive. The moment the Raptor initiated its dive, the Canadian systems didn't panic. They simply woke up. The stealth fighter was now being tracked by heat, by visual identification, and by its own electromagnetic emissions. The American pilot believed he was a ghost haunting an old house. In reality, he had just stepped onto a brightly lit stage, and the audience was recording every move in 4K resolution. Inside the Aurora's tactical compartment, there were no screaming alarms or frantic maneuvers. The atmosphere was closer to a library than a battlefield. Under the soft hum of cooling fans and dim blue tactical lighting, the tactical navigator took a sip of lukewarm coffee and calmly tapped a sequence of keys. The F-22's signature appeared on his screen not as a terrifying threat, but as a tracked file number, contact 401. This is the Canadian philosophy of electronic warfare. Boring is good. While the American pilot outside was pulling G-forces and feeling the adrenaline of the Intercept, the crew inside was following a rigid, practiced flowchart. Detect, classify, record. The senior acoustic operator didn't even look out the window. He adjusted his headset, verified the data stream quality, and noted the timestamp. The only difference this time was that this particular hotshot was bringing them a gift wrapped in classified waveforms. There was plenty of time to finish their coffee, while the American embarrassed himself. The real timeline of intelligence disaster began at 0919 local time. The F-22 slid into position off the Aurora's right wing, sitting just 200 feet away. At this distance, the American pilot decided to escalate the encounter from a visual inspection to a tactical threat. He flipped his master arm switch to simulate a combat lock, activating the AN/APG-77 radar in a concentrated track mode. On his heads-up display, the CP-140 was painted with a targeting diamond. He felt powerful, the apex predator, toying with a defenseless transport. But inside the Aurora, the electronic warfare officer watched his screens light up with frantic activity. The F-22's radar is famous for its low probability of intercept technology. It is designed to whisper so quietly that enemies don't know they are being tracked. But at this point-blank range, with the power focused on a single target, the Canadian ALQ-217 system didn't just detect the signal, it dissected it. Pulse repetition, frequency bandwidth, hopping patterns, scan intervals, and power modulation curves data that foreign intelligence agencies would spend billions trying to steal was now streaming onto Canadian hard drives. The pilot thought he was pointing a gun at their head. The Canadians knew he was handing over the blueprints to the gun. The Raptor then dropped back and accelerated, cutting aggressively across the Aurora's nose. The wake turbulence from the twin F-119 engines hit the turboprop plane like a physical hammer. The 140,000-pound Aurora shuddered, violently rolling 15 degrees to the left as the invisible vortex of disturbed air slammed into its stabilizers. The autopilot disconnected with a sharp warning tone. The Canadian pilots grabbed the yokes, wrestling the heavy aircraft back to level flight, while their coffee cups rattled in the cup holders. It was a petty, dangerous move, the aeronautical equivalent of a brake check on a highway, but while the pilots managed the physical energy of the aircraft, the sensor operators were busy mapping the thermal energy of the threat. The MX-20 infrared sensors locked onto the F-22's exhaust plumes. The Raptor relies on specialized rectangular nozzles to hide its heat signature from below, but at this angle, the Canadian optics were looking right up the tailpipe. They recorded exactly how the heat dissipated during high-thrust maneuvers, revealing the thermal blind spots of the world's best fighter. This data would tell future missile designers exactly where to look for a lock. The American pilot, frustrated that the Canadians hadn't changed course or radioed a plea for mercy, decided to demonstrate the Raptor's supernatural maneuverability. He pulled the nose up, slowing his aircraft to just 120 knots while maintaining altitude. This is the high angle of attack regime where conventional jets stall and fall out of the sky. The F-22 hung in the air, its nose pointed at the heavens, suspension maintained by raw engine power and computer-controlled thrust vectoring. It was a breathtaking display of physics-defying engineering. It was also a massive intelligence leak. As the Raptor hovered off their wing, the Canadian cameras were recording the deflection angles of its control surfaces. They logged how many degrees the horizontal stabilizers moved to counter the wind, how quickly the thrust vectoring nozzles pivoted to maintain balance, and the exact response time of the flight control computer. The pilot was performing a private air show, but the audience was building a kinematic model of his aircraft. They were learning exactly how the F-22 moves when it is slow and vulnerable. At 0924, the encounter reached its peak absurdity. The F-22 rolled, inverted, passing directly over the top of the Aurora. The distance was less than 100 feet. The American pilot looked down through his gold-tinted canopy, perhaps expecting to see panic in the cockpit below. Instead, he would have seen the turret of the MX-20 camera rotating to track him. The optics were so sharp at this range that they could inspect the condition of the radar-absorbent material coating on the Raptor's belly. They captured high-definition images of panel gaps, rivet lines, and maintenance wear and tear. Stealth relies on perfection. Any chip in the paint or loose panel increases the radar cross-section. The Canadians were now cataloging those imperfections, creating a visual map of where the invisible jet was actually visible. Every second the pilot spent showing off was another gigabyte of data stored in the Aurora's banks. He was burning thousands of dollars of jet fuel to intimidate a crew that was currently dissecting his machine with the cold detachment of a surgeon. Finally, at 0928, the American pilot grew bored with the lack of reaction. He snapped the F-22 level, engaged full afterburners, and rocketed vertically into the stratosphere, leaving a sonic boom in his wake. He probably radioed his wingman, laughing about how he rattled the old propeller plane. He didn't realize that his departure provided one final gift, the acoustic signature of the F-119 engines at maximum power. The Aurora's sonobuoys and acoustic sensors picked up the specific frequency vibrations of the engine roar, adding one last piece to the puzzle. The sky was quiet again, but the damage was done. The F-22 had come to teach a lesson, but it was the student who had taken all the notes. Throughout the entire 40-minute ordeal, the CP-140 did not deviate from its assigned flight path by a single degree. The pilot held 21000 feet. He held heading 270. He held an airspeed of 300 knots. To the F-22 pilot, outside, this lack of reaction likely felt like arrogance or perhaps incompetence. In reality, it was the ultimate display of professional discipline. By refusing to maneuver, the Canadian crew denied the American pilot the one thing he actually needed: data on their defensive capabilities. If the Aurora had banked hard or dived, the Raptor's sensors would have recorded the patrol plane's stress limits and turning circles. By flying straight, the Canadians remained a blank slate. They gave up nothing. The American, conversely, had given up everything. The electronic emissions captured by the ALQ-217 were already being processed into a threat library. This is the database that tells a fighter jet's computer what is locking onto it. Before this morning, the specific radar modulation of that F-22 unit was a theoretical variable. Now, it was a known value. This data allows Canadian and Allied engineers to update their radar warning receivers to identify this specific threat instantly. It allows them to program electronic jamming pods to broadcast the exact inverse frequency needed to blind the Raptor's sensors. The American pilot thought he was participating in a contest of strength. He didn't realize he was voluntarily filling out a technical survey for his own defeat. The message from the cockpit of the Aurora was silent but deafening. "You don't scare us, and now we know exactly how you work." Let's look at the cold, hard accounting of this encounter. The United States Air Force burned approximately $45,000 in aviation fuel and maintenance hours for that 40-minute display of vanity. In exchange, they gained absolutely nothing. No tactical advantage was secured, no territorial concession was made, and the Canadian patrol pattern did not change by a single inch. On the other side of the equation, the Royal Canadian Air Force spent $0 extra. The Aurora was already flying its scheduled patrol route. The fuel was already paid for. For the price of a regular Tuesday morning flight, they acquired electronic fingerprints worth millions on the black market of defense intelligence. It was the most lopsided trade in modern peacetime aviation. The F-22 brought speed, power, and noise. The Aurora brought patient sensors and a hard drive. In the calculus of modern warfare, the plane that flies home with the data is the winner, regardless of who flew faster. The American pilot proved his jet could move. The Canadian crew proved they could think. When the F-22 touched down back at Elmendorf Air Force Base, the pilot likely walked into the squadron room with a swagger, recounting how he lit up a Canadian transport and rattled their cage. It makes for a great story over beers. But the debrief at NORAD headquarters told a very different, much quieter story. Within 48 hours, the digital tapes from the Aurora were downloaded and analyzed. The narrative of a dominant American protector buzzing a helpless ally falls apart when you look at the navigation logs. The logs showed a disciplined professional maintaining lawful airspace usage while being harassed by an erratic actor. More importantly, the electronic warfare officers ultimately had to report that their flagship stealth fighter had been stripped naked electronically. The captured radar signatures and thermal profiles would be circulated across the Five Eyes intelligence network, updating threat libraries that had been stagnant for months. That young pilot's ego trip didn't just embarrass himself, it compromised the operational security of every F-22 inches the wing. By acting aggressively, he shattered the illusion of his own invincibility. He turned a routine intercept into an intelligence bonanza for an ally that, while friendly, is still a competitor in the global defense market. The F-22 represents the pinnacle of kinetic power, fast, lethal, and undeniably loud. The CP-140 represents the future of warfare, integrated, observant, and quietly dangerous. It is a reminder that in the gray zone of military encounters, the one who reacts is often the loser. The Americans left that airspace thinking they had asserted dominance because they made the Canadian plane shake. In reality, they had just been audited. And in the high-stakes world of defense technology, having your secrets read is far more dangerous than being buzzed. They came looking for a reaction. They got a shrug, and that shrug hid a digital knife. If you want to understand the reality behind the headlines of modern conflict, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what we analyze next.